Mr Kenny, your thoughts on how negotiations are going so far?
Well, the referendum's been held. The letter has triggered Article 50, Britain's decision to leave, and the process is underway. And the initial stages of the process are determined on the European side by Michel Barnier, who acts on behalf of the European Council. And he set out 3 criteria in which progress has to be made before they enter talks about future trade arrangements. And those 3 are the rights of citizens from Europe in Britain and vice versa, the cost of Britain exiting, and the question of the Irish border, which will be the only land border within the European Union when Britain has actually left. This is causing real problem, and at the Council meeting, which will take place this week, the decision will be not to proceed any further at the moment because sufficient progress has not been made on those 3 issues.
Let's talk about the Irish issue. I want to spend some time with you discussing that. To varying degrees, both the UK and Ireland have said they won't build a border. How realistic is that?
Well, you have to understand the complexities of Ireland in this matter. There were 3,000 people bombed, murdered, killed during the time of the Troubles in the 60s and 70s. America helped Ireland greatly at that time, as did Europe. And when President Clinton sent over George Mitchell, after 5 years' work, the Good Friday Agreement was signed off and accepted, an internationally binding agreement lodged in the United Nations and so on. So that's got to be preserved in all its entities. We're not having a return to a hard border with customs posts because that brought with it sectarianism previously. So when Britain made this decision, this is one of the issues that had to be looked at. Now, when the Prime Minister says, I want the best deal for Britain, remember there are 26, 27 other countries on the other side of the table, and they want a deal as well. But you can't have a situation where you can have the best of everything. We are currently in the European Union, in the single market, and with a customs union, and a market of 500 million people, and decide to leave those 2 and expect to be able to do deals all over the world. So until we get past these 3 first issues, Barnier will not recommend going on to deal with the question of trade. Now, if you were to follow through on what the Prime Minister said there, you're talking about a hard Brexit. This would be catastrophic in many cases. Obviously, in the case of Ireland, as closest to Britain, would be very detrimental indeed. But politics has got to come into play here. And when politicians are faced with deadlines and they're faced with reality of what might happen, things click into place. That's why a transition period is essential. Britain is expected to leave in March of 2019. The talks will not be concluded by then. You need a transition period. This is being talked about. It might have to be much longer than 2 years. And at the end of the day, Article 50 is the one that triggered Britain's request to leave, as they're entitled to do. Article 60 is one that, if it were triggered, would cause problems in Britain politically, but would allow Britain to stay for a further period while all of these many thousands of issues are sorted out.
A couple of other things that we need to touch on there, one of which you said the transition period may well need to be longer than 2 years. How long do you think the transition period would need to be?
It's got to be as long as you can arrive at a working solution. If Britain takes the view that it says, well, we're going to have a hard Brexit and we're going to leave anyway, you know, no deal is absolutely detrimental. This is where politics and political leaders have got to look at what's lying up ahead. I came out here with one of the leading Irish legal firms, Matheson, who deal with foreign direct investment into Ireland. And I have to say that from our point of view, American investment says, you know, we want to be part of the single market. We want to have access to European Union monies, and we want to have access to a European churn of talent. And this is where Britain is playing with now. Because if they leave, they haven't negotiated a trade deal in 40 years. And if you leave the single market behind and the customs union, you are leaving Northern Ireland with its peace process intact, but with a political settlement of some unknown entity at the moment, which would be quite damaging and very dangerous.
Well, Mr Kenny, 2 things there. One is the sensitivity to the history that both the UK and Ireland quite obviously share around the border. The second one, though, there's an opportunity, a competitive opportunity for Ireland, isn't there, at the same time? So how do you weigh those 2 things?
Well, see, the Good Friday Agreement, which is the peace process, means that every citizen in Northern Ireland is entitled to Irish citizenship, to British citizenship, or both, and full European Union rights. The Good Friday Agreement is not going to be damaged in any way. In fact, the Irish government, which I led myself, and the current government have worked very closely with Britain, worked very closely with Northern Ireland. But we'd like to think that the executive, which hasn't functioned in 12 months in Northern Ireland, would get down to business and start to make decisions for its people. So we have very good relations with Britain. We will maintain those good relations with Britain. But clearly, this is an issue where politics has got to make the decision. It's not technological. It's not just about controls. Politics is always about people, and government is always about making decisions that affect those people.
And politics
this is one such instance.
And politics has gotten really nasty. I mean, part of the issue has been all the party crosstalk within the Tory party, making it very difficult for EU leaders to take anything that anyone says from the UK seriously. Having been Prime Minister of Ireland, how would you handle something like that in your own party?
Well, see, David Cameron said, if I get a majority, I'll give you a referendum. He gave the referendum. It was a non-binding referendum, actually, and then he resigned. Prime Minister May was elected, and after due consideration, she decided to have another election, ostensibly to get a bigger majority to be able to do things, but that didn't happen. And what emerged out of the mist and the confusion of all of that was that the British government is now being propped up by the Democratic Unionist Party, which was the only party in Northern Ireland to actually vote to leave. Therefore, with a sweetener of £1 billion on the table from the British government, that needs to be being acted upon now, because Northern Ireland is suffering with not having an executive. And the Irish Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, has called upon the politicians in Northern Ireland to get down to business, put their assembly together and start making decisions about Northern Ireland. I support that. But we will not tolerate a position where the Good Friday Agreement and the peace process would be infringed upon in any way. And when the argument about the referendum was on in the beginning, this was an issue that should have been considered far more carefully by British politicians in explaining to people what a vote to leave would actually entail, the only land border within the European Union. And it's important to remember that we should not forget the past, that the European Union is not just an entity of a single market and a customs union. It's also the longest lasting peace process on the planet.
You've been very clear and very emphatic about that. Message received. But has anyone come up with a proposal, any theoretical proposal? On the one hand, you could not have a firm border and yet have Northern Ireland not part of the customs union. Seems to me those are diametrically opposed to one another.
Well, when Great Britain says what we want is the best deal for Britain, Europe says we have the best operation that we can have now. We can improve it. But we've got a single market. We've got a customs union. That means freedom of movement of people, of capital, of goods and of services. And in fairness, Europe responded to David Cameron's promptings by saying we will deal with the question of social welfare payments and we will deal with the question of emergency numbers of immigrants coming into Britain if the referendum is passed. So if you remove yourself from a market of 500 million people and you remove yourself from a customs union, you cannot be in the same position as you are now. There is no reason why Great Britain could not become a global power within the structure of the European Union at the moment. And remember that Europe has always had the exclusive competency of drafting trade agreements like CETA or whatever. Britain has not negotiated a trade deal in 40 years.
Anyone that's been to Ireland recently will be struck by the presence of US technology companies. Within the European Union, Ireland is set to lose a key ally in the shape of the United Kingdom on issues like taxation. What do you make of the European Commission's current approach to companies like Apple and the relationship that the Commission seems to have with the Irish government currently?
Well, Ireland's always worked very closely with Britain, and it's true to say that they were not just an ally for Ireland, but an ally for many other countries as well. But as a small country, we build relationships with other small countries on issues that are of, mutual importance. In that sense, Ireland's dependency upon the British market, while it's still critical for us, has declined over the past number of years because we've gone to other markets in Europe and beyond. In respect of tax, for instance, corporate tax, ours is 12.5%. Across all sectors, it's neither gone up nor gone down, and it's always been a red line issue for Irish governments. Not only that, but it has the full force of the European Union treaties, with a protocol specifically inserted into the treaty saying that Ireland's rate is 12.5%. Other countries can adjust if they wish. In fact, when the argument started about the common consolidated corporate tax base, Ireland was the country in holding the presidency that said, let's put it as the first item on the agenda and let all the countries discuss it. But that discussion went nowhere. In respect of Apple, we've been very clear on this. The Irish Revenue Commissioners are independent of the executive, and over the years they have never done sweetheart deals with any independent company. So we appealed that to the European courts, as did Apple themselves. Remember, you can only collect taxes where economic activity takes place, and Apple have a very big firm in County Cork.
Yeah.
But you know, VAT is paid by the countries where the mobile phones are sold, and IP is vested in California. And as a consequence of all of that, Ireland has been very clear. We're up front with the OECD. We're the first country to have a fully compliant knowledge development patent box.
And yet, Mr. Kenny, the EU is still deciding to sue Ireland over their progress to collect taxes. Why?
Yeah. The Irish government has disagreed fundamentally with the European Commissioner and said we are not expected to collect the tax of the world. We collect tax and pay tax on the basis of economic activity. So we've been very clear on that. But that will wind its way now through the European court system in due course. And they've made great progress on putting the amount of money into an escrow account, which work has been underway for the last couple of years.